The golden light of 1,000 crystal droplets danced across the polished marble floors of Chateau Etuile, the city's most prestigious dining establishment, where every whisper carried the weight of fortune and every glance held the promise of power. It was a Tuesday evening in late November when the first frost had begun to kiss the windows of the towering skyscrapers beyond, and the air inside hummed with the quiet symphony of wealth, the soft clink of silverware against bone china, the gentle rustle of silk and cashmere, the muted conversations of those who shaped the world with their signatures. The restaurant itself was a masterpiece of architectural elegance, with soaring ceilings adorned with hand-painted frescoes depicting scenes of abundance and prosperity. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, casting prismatic rainbows across the cream-colored walls lined with original paintings worth more than most people's homes. Each table was draped in pristine white linen, set with sterling silver cutlery and baccarat crystal glasses that caught the candlelight like captured stars. At table 47, positioned perfectly to overlook the glittering cityscape below, sat Marcus Alexander Chen, 42 years old, pharmaceutical empire heir, and one of the most influential men in the country. His charcoal Tom Ford suit was impeccable, tailored to perfection by the finest craftsmen in Milan. His Italian leather shoes gleamed under the ambient lighting, and his Patek Philippe watch caught the reflection of the candles that flickered like tiny stars across every table. The watch had been a gift from his late wife Sarah on their 10th wedding anniversary, its weight on his wrist, a constant reminder of everything he had lost. Yet despite the luxury that surrounded him, despite the untouched lobster thermidor cooling on the plate before him, its delicate aroma wafting upward in the warm air, Marcus stared into the distance with eyes that held no light, no warmth, no trace of the man he once was. The food before him represented the finest culinary artistry money could buy, prepared by a chef who had trained in the kitchens of Paris and earned 3 Michelin stars, but it might as well have been cardboard for all the pleasure it brought him. 3 years had passed since the diagnosis, since the words terminal cancer had shattered his world and taken his beloved wife Sarah and their twin daughters, Emma and Grace, from him in the cruelest way imaginable. Sarah had been only 38 when the doctors found the aggressive tumor that would steal her away in just 8 months. The treatments had failed. The experimental drugs his own company had developed proved useless, and Marcus had watched helplessly as his family slipped away like sand through his fingers, leaving him with nothing but an empire built on healing others while he couldn't save the ones he loved most. Emma and Grace had been only 5 years old when their mother died, too young to understand why Mama was getting sicker, too innocent to comprehend the finality of death. They had clung to Marcus in those final months, their small hands seeking comfort he felt unable to provide, their bright laughter gradually fading as the house grew quieter and sadder. When Sarah passed away on a rainy Thursday morning in March, the girls had asked when she was coming home, and Marcus had broken down completely, unable to explain that she never would. The grief had consumed him so completely that he had barely functioned for months afterward. His sister had taken the girls to live with her family in California, promising it was temporary, just until he could get back on his feet. But the temporary arrangement had stretched into permanence as Marcus retreated further into his work, building walls around his heart that seemed impossible to breach. He sent money, expensive gifts, called on birthdays and holidays, but he had become a stranger to his own daughters, too afraid of his own pain to risk loving them the way they deserved. He lifted his wine glass mechanically, the deep burgundy liquid swirling like liquid shadows, a vintage Bordeaux that cost more per bottle than most people earned in a week. The sommelier had recommended it personally, describing its complex notes of blackcurrant and oak, its perfect balance of tannins and acidity, but Marcus tasted nothing. Food had lost all flavor since Sarah's death. Wine had become merely a way to numb the endless ache in his chest. But before the glass could reach his lips, a voice broke through the elegant silence beside him, soft as a prayer and desperate as a dying breath. "May I have your leftovers, sir?" Marcus turned slowly, his heart skipping a beat as his eyes fell upon a young woman standing beside his table. Her presence so unexpected in this temple of wealth that for a moment he wondered if he was dreaming. She couldn't have been more than 21, her auburn hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders, framing a face that spoke of sleepless nights and endless worry. Her coat was thin, patched in places where the fabric had worn through, and her boots were scuffed and splitting at the seams, held together with what looked like electrical tape. But it was the baby in her arms that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. A little girl, perhaps 10 months old, with wide green eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of someone much older, wrapped in a blanket that had seen better days but was clean and carefully maintained. The child's tiny fingers clutched at her mother's coat, and her gaze was fixed on the plate of food that Marcus had barely touched, her little mouth opening and closing, as if she could taste the warmth and richness from across the table. The restaurant fell silent around them, conversations dying mid-sentence as heads turned to witness this unprecedented scene. A security guard began to move forward, his hand already reaching for his radio, but Marcus raised his hand slightly, a gesture so subtle yet commanding that the man immediately stepped back. The other diners watched with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort, some reaching for their phones to capture this unusual moment, others whispering behind their hands about the audacity of someone bringing such poverty into their exclusive sanctuary. "Please," the young woman whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle piano music that continued to play in the background, a soft melody that seemed to underscore the desperation in her words. "She hasn't eaten since yesterday morning. I've been trying to find work, but no one will hire me because of her, and the shelters are full. I'm not asking for money, just the food you're not going to finish." Her voice carried a slight accent, perhaps Spanish or Portuguese, and there was a tremor in it that spoke of someone who had never begged before, someone who was swallowing her pride for the sake of the child in her arms. She stood perfectly still, not swaying or fidgeting, her entire being focused on this moment that could mean the difference between her daughter going to bed hungry or having something warm in her tiny stomach. Marcus studied her face, searching for any sign of deception, any hint of the con artists who sometimes targeted wealthy individuals in places like this. He had encountered them before, smooth talkers with rehearsed sob stories and practiced tears, people who preyed on the guilt and sympathy of the rich. But all he saw was exhaustion, desperation, and a fierce maternal love that reminded him painfully of his own wife during those final months, when she had fought so hard to stay alive for their daughters. The baby made a soft cooing sound, her little hand reaching toward the plate, and something inside Marcus's chest cracked open for the first time in 3 years. The sound was so pure, so innocent, that it cut through all his defenses like a knife through silk. This child knew nothing of pride or shame, nothing of social hierarchies or economic disparities. She only knew hunger and the instinctive trust that her mother would somehow find a way to feed her. Without a word, he pushed the entire plate toward her, along with a basket of warm bread and untouched side dishes. The gesture was simple, but it felt monumental, as if he was pushing away 3 years of numbness and isolation along with the food. "Take it all," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion he hadn't felt in so long he'd forgotten what it was like to care about anything beyond his own pain. The young woman's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't break down. Instead, she reached into her worn purse and pulled out a small container and a plastic spoon, carefully transferring portions of the food with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to make every morsel count. Her movements were precise, economical, wasting nothing as she portioned out the lobster, the roasted vegetables, the creamy risotto that had cost more than she probably saw in a month. She sat on the edge of the chair across from him, cradling her daughter close as she began to feed her tiny spoonfuls of the mashed vegetables and tender pieces of meat. The baby's face lit up with pure joy at the taste of the warm food, her little legs kicking with excitement as she babbled happily between bites. She clapped her hands together, creating a soft patting sound that seemed to fill the entire restaurant with unexpected warmth. And when she looked up at Marcus with those bright green eyes, she smiled, a toothless, innocent smile that pierced through the armor he had built around his heart. Her name is Lily, the young woman said softly, noticing Marcus's intense gaze. She's my everything. I was studying to be a teacher when I got pregnant. The father left before she was born, and my parents, they said I was a disappointment. I've been on my own since she was 3 months old. Marcus felt something shift inside him, a tectonic movement in the foundations of his carefully constructed isolation. He watched as the young mother fed her daughter with infinite patience, never taking a bite for herself, her entire focus devoted to ensuring that Lily had enough to eat. It was a love so pure, so selfless, that it reminded him of everything he had lost and everything he had forgotten about what it meant to be human. The way she held the spoon, testing each bite to make sure it wasn't too hot. The way she smiled encouragingly as Lily opened her mouth like a baby bird. The way she wiped the child's face with such gentle care. It all spoke of a devotion that transcended circumstances. This young woman might be homeless, might be desperate, but she was also completely devoted to her child in a way that made Marcus's chest ache with recognition and loss. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Isabella," she replied, not looking up from her daughter. "Isabella Martinez." "And thank you. I know this is unusual. I've never done anything like this before, but I was walking by and saw all the food and she was crying and I couldn't let her go hungry again." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of a mother's desperation. Marcus could see the shame in her posture, the way her shoulders curved inward as if trying to make herself smaller, less noticeable. But there was also strength there, the kind of strength that only comes from having no choice but to be strong. The baby finished eating and immediately began to fuss, her tiny face scrunching up as she prepared to cry. Isabella instinctively began to rock her, humming a soft lullaby in Spanish that seemed to calm the child instantly. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, a traditional song that spoke of love and protection, of a mother's promise to always be there for her child. Marcus watched, transfixed, as mother and daughter shared this intimate moment in the middle of one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. "You're a good mother," he said suddenly, the words surprising him as much as they seemed to surprise her. Isabella looked up at him then, really looked at him for the first time, and Marcus saw his own grief reflected in her eyes. Not the same grief, but grief nonetheless. The loss of dreams, of security, of the life she had planned before everything changed. There was also something else there, a flicker of hope that she was trying hard to suppress, as if hoping for too much might somehow jinx this moment of unexpected kindness. "I try to be," she whispered. "Some days I feel like I'm failing her, like she deserves better than what I can give her." "She deserves you," Marcus said firmly. "She deserves a mother who would walk into a place like this and risk her pride to make sure her child doesn't go hungry. That's not failure. That's love." The words seemed to surprise him as much as they surprised her. He hadn't spoken about love in 3 years, hadn't allowed himself to think about what it meant or how it manifested. But watching Isabella with Lily, seeing the fierce protectiveness in her eyes and the gentle care in her hands, he was reminded of what love actually looked like when stripped of everything else. The baby had fallen asleep in Isabella's arms, her little chest rising and falling peacefully as she clutched her mother's finger. Isabella stood carefully, wrapping the remaining food in napkins and tucking it into her purse with practiced efficiency. Every movement was careful, deliberate, designed not to wake the sleeping child or waste a single crumb of the precious food. "Thank you," she said again, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't know what this means to us." As she turned to leave, Marcus found himself standing as well, his hand reaching out as if to stop her. "Wait," he said, then paused, not sure what he wanted to say. The moment felt too important to let slip away, too significant to end with just a simple goodbye. "Where are you staying?" he asked finally. Isabella hesitated, then answered honestly. "We have a room at the Sunset Motel on 5th Street. It's not much, but it's warm and safe." Marcus nodded, committing the information to memory. The Sunset Motel was in one of the city's rougher neighborhoods, the kind of place where people went when they had nowhere else to go. He had driven past it countless times on his way to business meetings, never giving it a second thought, never considering the lives being lived behind those faded doors. He watched as she walked away, weaving through the tables with her sleeping daughter, disappearing through the heavy glass doors into the cold November night. The restaurant slowly returned to its normal rhythm, conversations resuming, but Marcus remained standing, staring at the empty chair where she had sat. The other diners gradually lost interest in the unusual scene, returning to their own meals and conversations, but Marcus couldn't shake the image of the young mother and her baby. For the first time in 3 years, he had felt something other than numbness. For the first time since Sarah's death, he had looked at another person and seen not just their suffering, but their strength. And for the first time since he had lost his daughters, he had witnessed the kind of love that made everything else seem small and insignificant. He left the restaurant that night without finishing his wine, without saying goodbye to the business associates who had been expecting him to join them for drinks. Instead, he drove through the city streets, his mind racing with thoughts and feelings he had been suppressing for so long that they felt foreign and overwhelming. The city looked different somehow, as if he was seeing it through new eyes. The homeless people huddled in doorways, the late-night workers heading home on buses, the countless stories of struggle and survival playing out in the shadows of his privileged world. The next morning, Marcus found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He canceled his morning meetings and drove to the Sunset Motel. He didn't go to Isabella's room, didn't knock on her door, or announce his presence. Instead, he simply observed from a distance, watching as she emerged with Lily wrapped in a thin blanket, walking to the bus stop with the determined gait of someone who had learned to keep moving no matter how tired she was. The motel was even more depressing in daylight than he had imagined. The paint was peeling, the parking lot was cracked and littered with debris, and the neon sign flickered intermittently. But Isabella walked out of that place with her head held high, her daughter secure in her arms, ready to face another day of uncertainty with quiet courage. He followed the bus to a small diner on the other side of town, where Isabella spent the next 4 hours cleaning tables and serving coffee to truckers and construction workers. She had arranged with the owner to keep Lily in a makeshift playpen behind the counter, and Marcus watched through the window as she worked tirelessly, pausing only to check on her daughter or to give her a bottle. The work was hard, the customers sometimes rude, but Isabella never complained, never showed anything but professional courtesy and genuine warmth. When her shift ended, Isabella collected her tips, a handful of crumpled bills and loose change that probably amounted to less than Marcus spent on a single cup of coffee, and bought a small container of formula and a package of diapers before catching the bus back to the motel. Marcus followed at a distance, his expensive car looking out of place in the rundown neighborhood, but he didn't care. He needed to understand her world, to see how she survived, to witness the daily miracle of her resilience. That night, as he sat in his penthouse apartment surrounded by the trappings of success that no longer meant anything to him, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. The apartment felt emptier than ever, filled with expensive furniture and artwork that Sarah had chosen, photographs of happier times that now seemed like scenes from someone else's life. He picked up his phone and made a call to his personal assistant. "I need you to do something for me," he said, discreetly. "I want you to find out everything you can about the Sunset Motel, specifically about ensuring that their heating system is working properly and that they have adequate security. And I want you to arrange for a delivery of groceries and baby supplies to room 127, but it needs to be done anonymously." His assistant, accustomed to unusual requests from wealthy clients, asked no questions. Within hours, arrangements had been made. A heating repair company would visit the motel under the guise of routine maintenance, a security firm would upgrade the locks and lighting in the parking lot, and a local grocery store would deliver supplies with no indication of who had paid for them. The next morning, Isabella opened her door to find boxes of food, formula, diapers, and warm clothes for both her and Lily, along with a note that simply said, "For Lily, from someone who understands what it means to love a child." Isabella stood in the doorway, Lily in her arms, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the supplies that would keep them fed and warm for weeks. She had no idea who had sent them, but she whispered a prayer of gratitude to whoever had shown such kindness to a stranger. The food was high quality, the baby supplies were name brands, and the clothes were new and perfectly sized. Someone had paid attention, had cared enough to make sure everything was exactly what they needed. This continued for weeks. Anonymous deliveries, small acts of assistance that appeared as if by magic. The motel's heating was mysteriously repaired. Isabella's shifts at the diner increased, and opportunities seemed to present themselves just when she needed them most. She began to hope again, to believe that maybe, just maybe, things were finally getting better. But Marcus's anonymous support was about to be tested in ways he never anticipated. One evening, as he sat in his usual spot watching over Isabella and Lily from afar, he witnessed something that made his blood run cold. A man approached Isabella as she was leaving the diner, someone who seemed to know her, someone who made her entire body tense with fear. "You can't hide from me forever, Isabella," the man said, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "Lily is my daughter too, and I have rights." Marcus watched as Isabella clutched Lily closer, her face pale with terror. The man was tall and muscular, with the kind of aggressive posture that spoke of someone accustomed to getting his way through intimidation. His clothes were expensive but flashy, his gold jewelry catching the streetlight as he moved closer to Isabella. "You gave up those rights when you walked away," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. "You wanted nothing to do with us then, and you can't just come back now and demand to be part of her life." "I can take her away from you," the man threatened, stepping closer. "Look at how you're living, in a motel, working in a diner. Any judge would see that I can provide better for her than you can." Isabella's hand shook as she backed toward the bus stop, but the man followed, his intentions clearly malicious. Marcus could see the calculation in his eyes, the way he was enjoying Isabella's fear, the power he felt in threatening her. This wasn't about wanting to be a father. This was about control, about punishing Isabella for some perceived slight. It was then that Marcus stepped out of his car, his presence immediately commanding attention. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The man looked him up and down, taking in the expensive suit and the confident demeanor. "This is a private family matter," he said. "It doesn't concern you." "Actually," Marcus said, stepping between the man and Isabella, "it does concern me. This woman and her daughter are under my protection, and I suggest you leave them alone." "And who are you supposed to be?" the man sneered. Marcus smiled, but it was a cold, dangerous smile. "I'm someone with the resources to make your life very difficult if you continue to harass them. I'm someone who can afford the best lawyers in the city and who has connections you can't even imagine. And I'm someone who doesn't make empty threats." The man looked between Marcus and Isabella, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he stepped back, but his expression remained hostile. "This isn't over," he said to Isabella. "I'll be back." As he walked away, Isabella turned to Marcus, her eyes wide with shock and gratitude. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why are you helping me? Who are you?" Marcus looked down at Lily, who was reaching out to him with her tiny hands, and felt his heart break open completely. "I'm someone who lost everything," he said quietly. "And you're someone who reminded me what it feels like to have something worth protecting." From that moment on, there was no more hiding, no more anonymous assistance. Marcus officially entered Isabella and Lily's lives, and with his protection came safety, security, and something neither of them had dared to hope for, a chance at a real future. He moved them out of the motel and in a comfortable apartment in a safe neighborhood, enrolled Isabella in night classes to finish her teaching degree, and ensured that Lily had everything she needed to thrive. But more than that, he gave them something money couldn't buy. He gave them a family. The change in all three of them was remarkable. Isabella blossomed under the security and support, her natural warmth and intelligence shining through now that she wasn't constantly worried about survival. She threw herself into her studies with the passion of someone who had been given a second chance, earning top grades and the respect of her professors. Lily thrived in her new environment, her laughter filling the apartment with joy that Marcus had thought he would never experience again. And Marcus himself began to heal, the love he felt for this little girl and her mother slowly mending the wounds that had nearly destroyed him. The first time Lily called him Papa, Marcus broke down and cried tears of joy and grief intermingled. He cried for the daughters he had lost, for the years of loneliness and pain, and for the unexpected gift of love that had found him, which is like it. Isabella completed her teaching degree with honors, and Marcus was there in the audience when she walked across the stage, Lily clapping her hands from her seat in the front row. The pride on his face was unmistakable, the love in his eyes undeniable. A year later, on a warm spring evening, Marcus took Isabella and Lily to the same restaurant where they had first met. This time, they were seated at the best table in the house, Lily in a high chair between them, babbling happily as she played with her toys. "Do you remember the first time we were here?" Marcus asked, reaching across the table to take Isabella's hand. "How could I forget?" she replied, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. "I was so scared, so desperate. I never imagined that asking for leftovers would lead to this." Marcus smiled, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. "You weren't asking for leftovers," he said softly. "You were asking for hope. And you gave me something I didn't even know I needed. You gave me a reason to live again." As he opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant engagement ring, Lily squealed with delight, clapping her hands as if she understood the significance of the moment. "Isabella Martinez," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, "will you marry me? Will you let me be Lily's father officially? Will you let me spend the rest of my life loving both of you the way you deserve to be loved?" Through her tears, Isabella nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. As Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger, the entire restaurant erupted in applause, the same guests who had witnessed their first encounter now celebrating their engagement. 6 months later, they were married in a small ceremony surrounded by the people who mattered most: Isabella's parents, who had reconciled with their daughter and embraced their new son-in-law and granddaughter, Marcus's close friends and business associates, and the staff from the diner where Isabella had worked, who had become like family to her. Lily served as the flower girl, toddling down the aisle in a white dress that made her look like a tiny angel, scattering rose petals with the serious concentration of someone performing a very important job. When she reached the altar, she raised her arms to Marcus, who scooped her up and held her during the ceremony, making it clear that this was not just a marriage, but the formation of a true family. In his vows, Marcus spoke of loss and redemption, of the night when a young mother's courage had saved him from a life of emptiness. Isabella spoke of hope and second chances, of the man who had seen past her circumstances to the woman she was and the woman she could become. As they kissed to seal their union, Lily clapped her hands and shouted, "Mama! Papa!" bringing laughter and tears to everyone present. 5 years later, Marcus and Isabella were blessed with a son, David, who grew up knowing that love comes in many forms and that families are built not just through blood, but through choice, commitment, and the courage to open your heart to someone who needs it. Lily, now a bright and confident 6-year-old, often asked her parents to tell her the story of how they met. And each time Marcus would say, "Mama was brave enough to ask for what she needed, and Papa was lucky enough to be there when she did." The pharmaceutical company that Marcus had inherited became a leader in developing treatments for childhood diseases, with Isabella serving as the head of their community outreach program, ensuring that no child would go without medical care because their parents couldn't afford it. They established the Sarah, Emma, and Grace Foundation in memory of Marcus's first family, providing support for single mothers and their children, offering everything from job training to childcare to housing assistance. Isabella's story became a beacon of hope for thousands of women facing similar struggles, proof that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the most beautiful outcomes. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the house was peaceful, Marcus and Isabella would sit together and marvel at the journey that had brought them to this place. What had started as a desperate plea for leftovers had become a love story that changed not just their lives, but the lives of countless others. They never forgot the lesson that had brought them together, that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, and that every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the power to create miracles. And in the end, that's exactly what had happened. A miracle born from a moment of desperation, nurtured by compassion, and transformed by love into something beautiful and eternal. If this story has touched your heart, if it has reminded you of the power of kindness and the miracle of second chances, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear this message of hope. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the triumph of love over adversity. And remember that sometimes the most extraordinary miracles begin with the simplest acts of human compassion. Thank you for watching, and may you always have the courage to ask for what you need and the wisdom to give what you can.